Welcome to Talking Tuesday. I am your host, Fancy Quant, and I'd like to welcome Didier Lopes to the channel.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you just introduce yourself quickly on who you are, and then what is OpenBB, which is your company, and we can just go from there.
So my name is Didier Lopes. I'm originally from Portugal. I was born in Switzerland, but I'm originally from Portugal and studied bachelor in electrical and computer engineering and then a master's in control systems. Got very early on very excited about the field of actually self-driving cars, like randomly, and data science and AI very early on. Got into the financial domain because my previous maths teacher was actually working on his PhD thesis around modeling and forecasting of financial time series. And yeah, once I did the code for that with him, like I never really left the financial space. And that's when I started to work on OpenBB, which was this open source project that aggregated all of the data from these different data vendors in a way that I had full control over what I could do on top of it. And then we got traction and we ended up raising capital. And today, OpenBB is very different than only that project. So that project today is what we call our open data platform, and it's open source. And then we have our enterprise product, which is like a financial workspace. So think about like your high-end financial software, like a FactSet, CapIQ, Bloomberg. But we believe that firms will want more control over time on terms of like their specific workflows. So we built an infrastructure that allows you to mimic that software, but that you host on your own premises, and then you can connect with your data, connect with your AI agent. So it actually does even more than those softwares when it comes to AI workflows. And we don't have access to anything. So they just take the infrastructure and build on top.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess who is the target audience on this? Because like when we've chatted, so I've met you at a few conferences over the years.
Yep.
In my mind, right, you go to these big investment conferences, and I always assume like it's investment software. But then as
Mhm.
like you're talking about it, it's more of a general software. Like what are some of the customer types, like banks, investment firms?
Yeah.
Like what is kind of the breadth?
Yeah, so banks, hedge funds, like large investment firms. Um, if it's like a small fund with a few people, it's usually less of a good fit because you either have a more like simpler like workflow that one or two tools solves the needs, but with bigger organizations, there's usually more data that you are consuming. Like your workflows are more complex. There's a team around it, and so that's when we become like more a better fit. And then also like data vendors. So data vendors use us as in like if you're a data vendor today, you spend a ton of time like creating like high quality data. You don't want to spend those resources on the UI, the interface like distribution layer. And so you can utilize the workspace. And so we allow some data vendors to white label our workspace for their own. But there's also on the free tier that we actually have data vendors that have built applications and then they use us as a distribution mechanism to do their demos for people to buy their data, which is very interesting.
That's cool. So is it just like how's tell me a little bit more about the product, right? You're bringing in data, you're aggregating it. Are there data quality features within it? And is it more of like a presentation layers you're talking about? Like how does this work with
Yeah.
an infrastructure that's already built out?
Yeah, it's more of a presentation layer. So think of it that way. Let's say that you already have all of your API like setups. You have internal data. You have maybe data on Snowflake. You have third-party market data that you are consuming from DataBent or other sources. We allow you to integrate all of those together and be in control over what that interface like looks like. And we've built all the features so that you can connect your APIs to the workspace and tell, okay, this is just going to be a table. This one is going to be like a chart. This one is going to be a Sankey chart. This one is going to be different. And then you will be able to, as a developer, to build these applications that when someone lands onto the workspace, they can click and it opens up the application exactly as you want it. The thing here is like most products allow you to do these, right? Like if you think of like FactSet, like the developer from FactSet can also build that, right? But they are optimizing for a certain pool of users. And so they can't customize it more than that because otherwise they upset the rest of the user base. And so they are stuck in these like minima where the product is good enough for a lot of people, maybe the maximum that is possible, but it's not great for anyone because they are not allowing more access. And they have another problem, which is that they own the data. So their incentives is to only push their own data sets. They're not going to really allow to bring other data sources because it will compete with them. So we don't have that thing holding us back because we don't own any data. And so we just focus on the user experience and on the interface. And then we allow the end user to customize the workflow. So it's not just the developer that sets the app in a certain way. Then me as an end user, I can open a new dashboard and create my like layout of the dashboard with all the widgets, like almost like a BI tool as you want. And it's just that it looks more like a high-end software than it looks like a Power BI or a Tableau, essentially.
Okay. Have you guys worked with anyone on creating like key risk indicators and like model monitoring?
Yeah, we have a page on our website called Solutions, where there's a lot of like different applications that have been built for different like use cases, like shipping containers, like forecasting, alt data from like carbon arc, like volatility surfaces, compliance use cases, and so you could also mention that we could generalize pretty well for other use cases. We've just been more on the financial services space though.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. So one of the biggest headaches we had, so fintechs, big banks, we have all these models running. And then
Mhm.
everyone has a key risk indicator set up of like model parameters and drift, and then also looking at like thresholds of like loss thresholds. And I will tell you the biggest pain has been getting like a dashboard for management or someone to use. And then we're like, can they use Power BI? And we're like, I don't know if they have access to Power BI. And then how do we link these? And then Python stuff is has just been a headache as well, trying to do open source. And then to your point, right, there's a data security piece.
Correct.
I don't want to upload,
Yeah.
like consumer data to a server to be accessed.
Yeah, that's exactly. We have then all the enterprise features on top as well. So things like who role-based access. You create like certain roles. Which applications do they have access? Which individual widgets do they have access? But ultimately, because we don't own the data, then you can also control at the data level. So the same person that is two people that have the same role. But if they have different data accesses, the data is not going to render to them on the workspace. And that's a feature, not a bug. Is because the workspace is meant to be just the user experience like layer. And then the data side, you can like set it as you want. And we just like inherit those like who has access to what. And then you on the workspace, you can do all the things like, indicators when the data gets stale or updating the data like in real time, if it's data in real time. So we have these widgets.json file, which think of it as like our specs on how the workspace interprets like API endpoints essentially. And then there's the apps.json, which is the layer above on which widgets go onto this specific app and which pre-canned prompts, for instance, for specific workflows.
Okay. Is it point and click or is it like programming embedded to build out some of this, like dashboards for it?
No, so you build you have the endpoints already ready,
Okay.
and then you have these like static like widgets.json file that just tells the workspace how to call these endpoints. So when you're on the workspace and you are using this data, and if you are like checking the API call usage, you'll see that every time you are like interacting with specific widget, there's going to be a new like API call.
Okay.
Because it's down to the user to optimize as they want. So for instance, if you want to do caching, you can do caching on the data side, but maybe you don't want to because the data updates fast, Maybe you want to have like a run button that it doesn't refetch based on the user actions, which is kind of some heuristics that we have that, okay, the user is interacting with this chart, so they likely want the latest version. Then in those cases, you can click run. So this week we announced something with Snowflake. We have now a Snowflake native app, and all of the widgets there, they don't run the query by default. You actually have to click on the run button to run it, just so that you are not using compute when you actually don't need it.
That makes a lot of sense. We always had a little bit of an issue. At least I had issues with running Snowflake and pulling in specific packages like with Python. So it's nice to have that integration feature of that. So who's the user of the OpenBB? Not like the corporate level, but on the individual level. Is it like the software development teams, the quants, quant devs? Like who's typically using the actual product?
The analysts, PMs as the end user, and then the developers just end up like building stuff on it that is necessary, like quants. But we're seeing that analysts and PMs are becoming a bit more empowered, particularly with these coding AI agents. And I think one of the things we actually discussed a lot, even like last year, is like our positioning around like, okay, but how do we position ourselves? Because like we are targeting the end user, which is the analyst, but it needs a developer to build the applications in a way, the API endpoints. And then we started seeing that in the community, a lot of analysts were actually being able to, on their own, build these applications on the workspace. And so for us, it's like we really think that the analysts and PM are just going to be empowered to have more control over what they build. And so it's kind of, we are kind of splitting them in two, but in a way, they are kind of like converging almost. At least the analyst is getting a bit more proactive. And then we had like people then like someone from Vanek built like a full crypt application, and they were like an analyst, like pretty much on their own. And then we came in and we were like, okay, you can optimize here, you can add caching, you can improve these things, but like, on their own to build what they built, I was like, okay, this is super impressive. And then we started like seeing it more and more. And so I think it's the trend that is just going to be more, we're going to be seeing more of it, to be honest.
Okay. Are you guys including AI in this process to help, I guess,
Yes.
with that end user being able to build out some of this?
No, so not at the time. So this was before there was any AI to hate on the building of applications. So the person was like reading the documentation and then just going with it, and that's what was so impressive.
Yeah.
And then recently, actually a couple of weeks ago, what I did is I created an agent skill that
Okay.
helps you build an OpenBB app. And so it's like it has like these pipeline steps, which is like first an interview, as in like, okay, what is the data you want to see? Where is it? How do you want to consume it? Okay, what's the dashboard layout that you want? And so the agent actually produces ASCII to mimic what you will see in terms of like the tabs and everything on the workspace. And then you say, okay, I'm happy with this. Then it tells you, okay, these widgets are going to be grouped together. So when you change the ticker, they all update. Are you okay with that? And then it goes on to the development, which takes some time. And then in the end, what it does is if it has access to the browser, for instance, using Cloud Code with the /Chrome, it will actually add it onto the workspace, and you would validate that it works exactly as expected. And it's been like a game changer, because now when I have meeting with prospects, I ask them, okay, what it is that you want to do? And I just go through that skill after the call, and I asked, okay, create mock data, and this is the workflow I'm trying to eat here. And before, this was taking me maybe like a full afternoon, like doing that demo for the client. And now I can get it up in like 1 hour or so, like everything end to end.
That's impressive. It's nice to see the AI applications of it and just the simplification process, as it's helping a lot of like, yeah, the end user piece where I've been on the management side as well, where it's like I just need this one thing to work quickly, but I also don't want to wait for an analyst or someone to build this out for, a day or two.
I think the other thing as well is like these coding agents tools are amazing, and I think that one of the things that some of our clients are putting us against to is building in-house something custom, right? A bespoke application. Now the problem is that we face the same issue that I mentioned at the start, which is like a bespoke application that they built is bespoke for the developer, right? What happens when they leave the firm? What happens if someone wants something else different? It's never customizable on the end user end, which is where we come in. And that's not even mentioning all the enterprise features, like all the fact that we have like all the compliance, like, our product runs with like thousands of weekly active users. And so, it's been kind of battle tested now. And so you can't get that on a vibe coded application in a way, but I feel like because people are being like so empowered, which is something that they couldn't do before, they are just being mind blown by what is possible, and they think that, okay, this can go all the way to a 99.99% deployment app, and it just can't, like full end to end, particularly if you're not a developer and you don't know how to structure all of these things, like but yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you setting up APIs and doing the backend stuff has always been a frustration of mine. And there's always expertise knowledge in that. We took a tech team that was not financially trained. They would never worked in the finance industry. And even getting over that hurdle of understanding the differences and the nuances within the finance space was a challenge.
There's full teams on that space. There's like, Engineer, for instance. There's a few others, like Carbonark also has like their own like ontology and everything. Like we actually specifically say that we don't go into that space. We just focus on the interface infrastructure, because that space is hard. Like you have to have your own like expertise, and then it differs from domain to domain. And so like,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean as a quant, someone building the models, I was always like, we built the model, I'm like, here's the model, go implement it. Like I don't have any interest in like doing, the actual API work. And then I'm talking to tech teams like, well, do you want to use Kubernetes or fast API? Or and I'm like, I don't really care. Just make the thing run. Like
Yeah, I get
So
it.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of skill in that as well, I think, which is important. So how and what was the I guess the catalyst for OpenBB? Like what was that moment where you're like, this is a problem. How do we solve this problem?
So, okay, so at the time, as I mentioned, I was doing the code behind the PhD thesis of my previous teacher, which was around forecasting of financial time series. We were just using time series. I was writing code for like recurrent neural networks and long short-term memory, comparing it with ARIMA, and so it was just time series data for like 8 months, right? And after that, this was I was doing my first job, which is as a sensor fusion engineer. And so I started having some savings. And I was like, okay, this is cool, but I'm just looking at a time series. Like there's no way you get the complete picture here, right? So I started looking into fundamentals. I started looking into macro. I started looking into insider trading. I started looking into government contracts. And the problem I face is that I felt all the sources were on like different websites that I was consuming. Like I couldn't afford a Bloomberg, obviously, but like even if I could, like I didn't have the control that I wanted. Like as an engineer, like my day-to-day role was like I was a sensor fusion engineer, so I was then parsing a ton of data and creating like an estimate of like what the user was. In this case, like it was like trackers, and so a user like running would be I would like take all these measurements and estimate their altitude, their speed, and things like that. I wanted to have kind of that concept for my financial investments. So I wanted to be able to track a company and have kind of a major KPI that then I could break down in like sub KPIs that matter to me. And because I never had full control over the data, like that really annoyed me. And so the more I was like learning, I had this notebook and I was like writing, okay, here's the things I need to do. And then like technical analysis. And for technical analysis, I want to look into this. I want to run a regression. And so it just started taking me so much time to do the research process that was like, I have a full-time job. Like I actually cannot do this. And at the end of the day, it's just data. Like, oh, what can this be? If I can do this with like real world data, with like, like millisecond, like sensor data, like why can't we do this with financial data? And so I looked for projects available on GitHub, and the best available was Yahoo Finance repo. But it's like, it's only data that is grabbed from the website from Yahoo Finance. I can't really add into it, right? Because it's his own thing and it's not even fully officially supported by Yahoo Finance. And so I was like, okay, I mean, this kind of sucks, because there's nothing that I could use. And so I started building that. It was basically like an aggregator from all of these like different like data sources that I wanted to build something on top. Now the thing is, my main goal was to build the KPI thing on top. And then what I realized is like, okay, I need the data, right? And so one thing that I noticed is all of the data vendors that I was actually consuming at the time as a retail investor, they had the same like go to market, which is you go onto their websites, you sign up, they give you a free API key, which gives you quite a bit of data for free to get started. And then if I liked it so much, I would actually just subscribe, right? But I was like, that's perfect because it's the same endpoints that I'm using. It's just that the API key now allows for, access to more historical data or maybe more requests per minute, but it's the same, or maybe new data sets. And so that was the basis that I built the original version of OpenBB Terminal on. So it was command line interface. It had these like menus, the same way I had on my notebook written. And then there were just like commands that I was writing. So it would be like a TA menu, and then I would go into EMA command, which is exponential moving average. And then I would have like, like the commands, like things that I could use, like I could use the window length for L and then 20, and then you would run that. And then I would select which data source I was utilizing for that. And so what started happening is at the start, because I had all of these different data sources and their free tiers actually don't really correlate with each other that much. So I could get a ton of data for free. And so I was like, just basically kind of automating my research like workflow process. And then what started happening, it was people were adding new data sources for commands that already have a data source. So you would have like, like insider trading coming from like 3 different data sources, like fundamentals. There were like 5 or 6 different data sources that provide fundamentals. And people could just choose the one that they were already paying for or they preferred because they just trusted it more.
That makes a lot of sense. It's having control and access to putting all the pieces together is always challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I think a lot of vendor products fail at. Like a lot of vendors will come to me when I've worked on teams and stuff, and they'll say like, "Oh, we've got this thing, and it's amazing, it's great," and it's like this box that's like here, and I'm like, to your point, I'm like, that's fine. And I was like, but I want to move things around and make it more customizable and independent. And we trust nobody. Like I don't trust anyone. I've
Yeah.
worked in banks, fintechs. Like I don't trust anybody. I need to see like the actual process and like feel the tools and move things around and make it all happen. So
Yep.
I can definitely understand that frustration of like the lack of customizability
Correct.
within a lot of the tools, especially at a retail level. I feel like retail stuff is just built like trash. It's like, oh, it's a retail investor. Like, here's some simple, like flashy things. Like this will excite them. But it's
Yep.
a lot different than comparing it to like, yeah, institutional grade products and how they actually function.
Correct, which is kind of what I was looking at, but I couldn't afford it, you know? So I was like, okay, like I want to have more control over these. And so I was like, and there's no reason why I can't integrate the data from the big guys at some point, right? That was kind of the idea. Then I understood the market a bit better and how, not as open they can be, but yeah.
Understandable. When you were working on your research and your time series, I'm curious. So I spent quite a bit of my career working on time series and ARIMA modeling. Like, what were you guys researching? You're talking about adding in machine learning, LSTM approaches. Like, what was that research about, and like, what did you guys discover through that process?
Yeah, the research was pretty simple. So I just did the code. I did none of the writing of the thesis. I was like, I just tell me what you need from me. And I was like, this is fun, you know? Even the fine tuning of the hyperparameters of the long short-term memory, like it was the professor. So I just created all the infrastructure. And basically it was just comparing all of these models compared when it was to predict the S&P 500 up to a certain point. But it's like, I feel like it's really hard because like you could choose like any arbitrary date and have like completely different results. And so even when we implement like, the cross validation where you have like the validation set so that you are not like, overfitting the hyperparameters, there's like so much subjectiveness that I feel like is, yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big believer in like, these types of like benchmarks in terms of like point in time. Okay, if we look back for historical for this specific point in time, here's the prediction. So now this will, be a good translation to what we can get from this model. So I'm never really been a believer of that, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. I always feel like it's a little bit of a silly exercise. I see students do
Correct.
projects like that, and they're like, "This model is better than this model."
Yeah.
As my head starts to explode, I'm like, well, what data was used? Who built the
Correct.
models? Because like one person building an ARIMA versus another person versus STMs, like
Yep.
expertise will impact, yeah, like parameters, hyperparameter tuning, structures, design.
It's just so complex that is just if you think about the complexity of like there's so many variables and then you're trying to convey everything into a single number.
Hmm.
That's crazy. Like that, it just I don't think it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. And how is the model going to be used? It's like, are you forecasting a day, a week, a month? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Or you could say that, oh, I'm just forecasting if the stock price is going to go up and down. I was like, okay, fair. That's completely different than if you're forecasting, for every day or like intra, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when I was working, so I came in at the beginning of the whole CCAR revolution of all the risk management, and everyone was required to build out time series models and do all this stress testing with macroeconomic factors. And I came into this and everyone kept complaining ARIMA sucks. It's very unstable. It doesn't work. And they're going on and on about it. So I'm like, okay. And they would build a model out and I'd look at it and go, none of this makes sense. So I was like, I'll just rebuild one. Like, what? It's sure it's gonna be the same answer, but I'll rebuild one. And I'd rebuild it and it'd be like night and day different. And then they would look at me and go, how did you come up with like these variables and these lag structures? Like
Yeah.
this make like your model works great, but how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't know. Like here's like the four general steps. You did these too, right? But yeah, to your point, like everyone's getting very different models and
Yeah.
very different outcomes, and it's I think it's interesting to see because a lot of people don't realize like the amount of decision making that goes on in this process of just how to get to some sort of final conclusive model or whatnot.
Yeah, when I think about like ARIMAs and things like that, I actually love those type of models because they are just so simple, explainable, and I think for so many use cases they work so well. And it always reminds me. So my master's is in control systems, right? And I studied 1 year at Imperial, and we learned all of these types of like different controllers. So like the one that like I used on my thesis was like non-linear model predictive controller, where you basically have a model of the world that is trying to simulate the world, and you use that to try to predict, and then you update the controller like weights and things like that. But then you go into the industry and like everyone used the same PID controller, which is super simple. Three terms, is the one for proportional, one for the integration error, and one for the derivative for the speed. And that's it. And it's like, it works incredibly well for everything you can think of, like drones, like cars, everywhere. And it's like we're trying to learn about all of these that people are innovating on, and it's like, state of the art. But then in the industry, everyone uses PI. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reading a book now. I found it at this used bookstore, and I think it's like measurement analysis and something else. And
Hmm.
I'm like, this looks like a really interesting book. And I cracked it open and it's like stationarity, ergodic theory, and time series. I'm like, this is going to be good. And I'm starting to read it. And it's all like electrical engineering. And it's like giving these examples. And I'm like, this is fascinating. I was like, I've never been in the world of electrical engineering. I have no idea what's going on. But like
Yeah.
the theory is very, very similar in financial applications.
I agree. I love that topic. That's why I chose it for my master's. Actually, the reason I left Portugal bachelor is so I cut my electrical and computer engineering program at the bachelor level because it was an integrated master's, and the reason was because they have like you have to choose 3 out of 6 topics for the master's. And I just wanted to do control systems because for me that was like the most fascinating field that was applied in every single space in the world, like because it's all about feedback loops, and so like even reinforcement learning and things like that, like that's control systems. And so because they didn't offer that, then I looked for good universities, and I ended up in London.
How did you like TU Delft?
So okay, so the reason for that one was because I had like I was super comfortable in the university I was studying in Portugal, but like to the point that it was kind of easy to have like good grades. Like I knew I was gonna get like good grades and stuff, and because the university is good, but it's not like it's not like globally good, right? And so I looked into the exchange program that they had, and I was like, this would be amazing for me because my English like sucked at the time, and then also like to be out of the country like on my own to on a really good university, like I wanted to see how I would do in that type of environment that is not my comfort zone. And so I looked at the exchange program that we have, and TU Delft was the one that was ranked the best from the university had partnerships with. And I knew they were really good at like robotics and electronics, which are like topics that I liked, and then the control systems too. And so I went for a full like I think like 4 months, which is like the exchange program. And yeah, that kind of changed like my view as well on like studying abroad. It was like so hard compared to what I was doing in Portugal because I was on my own. Like, there was no previous year's resources. I had to like, spend like I never pulled as many all-nighters on this like 3, 4 months. I was going home at lunchtime to take like a 1 hour nap and then go back in the afternoon. And it was just like crazy intense. I remember it was actually the only like course that I failed in my life was an electronics one there. And like I studied like crazy, and one of the professors was actually on the team that built the chip for the PlayStation 2, which is like the most like famous like device. I had people on my side that like were younger than me that had like published papers on electronics, and I studied so hard for the course. I passed like the theory, but then the final exam was they would give you like a circuit device, and then you'd have to be on the room with the teacher and explain everything that is going on, like where the current is flowing, like what is happening. And I wasn't prepared. Like the university in Portugal did not prepare me for that level. And so I was like, no, I can't. And I studied so hard. But so I love that experience. Like TU Delft was amazing. And that's when I started also getting into self-driving cars and like, reinforcement learning and control systems. That kind of where my love there started like really hard for that, for AI as well.
Why didn't you stick with it? Like, why didn't you think about going to like a self-driving car company or?
So I did. So actually, once I finished because my thesis in Imperial, I wanted to do it in self-driving cars. They didn't have that choice on topics, so I had to find a teacher that would support me in doing in self-driving cars, and then I ended up doing it in there. So the title of the thesis is like Eco CACC, which is for Cooperative Adaptive Cruise Control, and basically the professor has more of an energy focus, and so I studied like the energy savings that we could have by having like vehicles driving together to get from the aerodynamics,
Mhm.
how you would like optimize the energy consumption if the cars knew what the car in front would do at all times. Like if you think about it, even like you don't need like semaphores because like if the cars all communicate with each other, it's just like efficient. And so I was super bullish on that. I did the thesis on that, and then the first company I applied when I left was actually Waymo. So I passed the first interview to Waymo. This was back in 2018. And then I went to do the second interview, and the interviewer asked me, okay, so you have the visa situation all done, right? And I was like, what do you mean? And it's like, do you have the right to work in the US? And I was like, no. The first interviewer didn't ask me about none of these. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't a position that was sponsored for Visa. And so I was like, okay, yeah, we can't move forward. And it's like, okay, that's a shame. And then the job I took was at a company called uBlocks, where they do like chips for actually self-driving cars. And so for me, that was close enough to the industry that I wanted to be in. And so I took that role, which was the company is based in like Switzerland, but I was working out of an office in UK.
Okay. And what did you do there? Like, what was like the daily job?
Yeah, so the daily job there was mostly like a software engineering job, like architect. So I was working on this project that they have the product line, which is an F9K, which is the chips that they give for like self-driving car companies. And so I was working on like the kind of around the area which I liked, which was the sensor fusion part, the inertial navigation system. They had like these dead reckoning, for instance, when the chip goes into like a tunnel, you don't get like signals from the GNSS there, and so it's like we need to, based on the movement of the car, predict where it's going to be. So they're like the best in the world, like doing that. And so I was working around that, but I wanted to get more into the algorithms behind the chips, but they had like tons of PhDs working on that space. And so for me, it's like, I had like a master's in like control systems, like it wasn't like a PhD in that specific topic. And so I could only do like so much. So it was mostly like on the supporting like function. And then that's when I got approached by this startup that was doing like trackers for runners that you put on the shoes. And they had like two people on their engineering team on the firmware. One was extremely good at Bluetooth. Another one was extremely good at like low level firmware, and they were looking for another person that was really good at like algorithms and signals. And I had been doing so much of that work on my spare time to try to get into that part of the previous company. And so I kind of showed that I could do it, and then I joined, and I loved it because I had so much autonomy. So I was actually able to like even implement like a Kalman filter
Okay.
for like these signals. Because for instance, when I joined in, they weren't doing like a lot of things that I thought they should be doing, and like is things like, let's say that they were using, I think, the barometer to estimate the altitude of the runner, and only, right? Whereas like it makes no sense that we are not utilizing other signals here, because if there's a jump, maybe there's like dust on the sensor and it's like affecting, but it's like if you have like a Kalman filter, you can counter that because the user didn't move enough for it to jump 10 meters in altitude, right? And so I came in and I was able to write Python scripts first and simulating what we would do, and then actually implement it in C++ in the software. And that was before there was any AI. So that was like super cool to see how you'd go from a simulation like world, recreating what the firmware would do, and then actually implementing and trying to optimize it for the specs of the firmware.
Okay. And those are like trackers for like runners, like running like races and things.
Yep. They went on your shoes, which was like it had its own like different challenges with the impact. So you'd have to counter that, but it was like really really fun. I really enjoyed it. Like, and there was so much data. I ended up even writing a paper while I was there, where I tried to write like a model, a support vector machine model to detect when there was a step happening, because they counted the steps. And so the whole premise is like, look, as a runner, why are we tracking like your running stats from your wrist when you are utilizing your feet to run? That was the premise of the startup.
Okay. Interesting. I ran a half marathon back in December. So I've like
Nice.
gone down this rabbit hole of like everybody has all these like apps and things, and like, yeah, like the armbands with the devices and the trackers. And I was curious about that because I'm always like wondering like how accurate is the actual device? Because so for my half marathon, I used GPS
Hmm.
and part of the app and using it, and it tracks the distance obviously, but the race is so broad in general. Like the course is huge and wide. There's like, I don't know, thousands of runners going. And so when I finished, I was like, oh, I looked at my app and I'm like, oh, I got like a 10:16 mile. Like I felt great. Like that was like an average pace. And then I get my race time and it's like 10:30 or 10:40 a mile. And I'm like, and then I start thinking, I'm like, how accurate is the GPS on the app versus the race versus like the course distances? Like my math starts going.
So the way we use test then actually in production, there was these people that would go run with all these like watches and stuff, and then compare like all of them. But the way to have the golden truth is using, I don't forgot the name, but it's this thing, this wheel that has like a counter that is basically counting, and if you run on top of it, like you get the exact measurement. So that's like the golden truth. And then you compare like all of these devices. So I remember being compared against like Aura Ring and things like that at the time. Aura, no, it was a Whoop, I think. Yeah, I think it was Whoop at the time. But like these companies now grew like so much, and we were compared with Ore for something else. But I don't think it wasn't the running. It was some sort of stats. I don't remember which ones.
What was like the biggest challenge in building that out? Like in that company itself, was it like the accuracy of the tracking, the steps, the elevation?
No, they had all of that sorted. So the data acquisition was pretty good. Like, everything when I came in, the firmware, but it's like when you are working with hardware, it's just like, then you appreciate software because if you want something different, it's not like you can just build it and compile, like you will have to have like these massive like cycles. And then, there's this like factory somewhere place else that needs to factor it. And then you come in and it's like, okay, this is not built up to the specs. And then when you build software, you have to have that in mind around like what resources do you have. And so it's just like everything is much harder. Like even the feedback loops of me implementing, for instance, when I was building the Kalman filter to propose that to be implemented in the product, like I was using like a Python script. I had the sensor data, I had like my source of truth, and then we would parse it and then show the results, right? That was super great, right? But what happened when I implemented it actually on the C++ of the firmware is that I would implement the code. I would do an over-the-air upgrade on the device, which would take like 30 to 40 minutes. Then I would be, okay, this is on. Then for me to test, I would actually go outside and I would have to put it on, run like these, like 3-4 kilometer and use at the time, I built like a script that would go to Google Maps and get the point location of the altitude so that I could use that for my testing and then come back and be like, oh, this is reported altitude 0. And it's because I didn't initialize correctly the Kalman filter. I was like, for fuck's sake. So then I would have to, update it and then go run still that day again after, so it's like the feedback loop is like so slow compared to software where you can do something, compile it, to try test it. And it's like, it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never even really thought about that. I mean, I've always just been on like the software side of like, I have data, it comes in, I program out some analysis, I check the results, and then you move on. But I can imagine out the hardware side, even going back into like the car example, I can imagine what a pain it would be because like you would program things out, try to get the hardware to work, and then you have to drive it. Like how
Yeah,
far?
you have to. You
Yeah,
have to. You will have like like for instance at Ublocks, they had like really good like simulation like pipelines and things like that. So they could recreate like really well the real world. But still like, the ultimate test is to actually like try it. Is, you
yeah,
can only get so far. Although I would say I've been thinking about like, the Waymo simulation world, and I do think that after you hit a certain like threshold of like being in the wild, I do think actually synthetic data for that use case is the best because like how many times like of actually driving a Waymo will like you see like a child running in front of the car. Maybe not that much, but in a simulation world, you can recreate that as many times as you want, and then you just have like a data labeler saying like what is correct and what it isn't. And so for that type of like getting to the 9999, I think that actually like this type of like simulation world is how we get there.
okay, yeah, I could see that. I never really thought about it. I've always been very critical of the tech world. I'm not like a huge. I'm always like the last adapter. Like I've got like like my Samsung is
I'm
like an
surprised.
yeah, like S6 or something, and I had a flip phone forever. I moved to New York City in 2015. I think it was 15. My wife's like, we have to get a smartphone. And like I still had no smartphone. I'm like, flip phones forever. So I was very against it. But in that sense, like that was always something that ran through my head, like the self-driving cars. I'm like, how many, like when everybody has a self-driving car, right? The scenario of like a squirrel running out, a cat, a dog, a child, like a drunk driver serving across is going to happen all the time on a giant population level.
Yeah.
But to test that, like you would have to like create these sorts of scenarios and get like, weird instances. Like if the sun is setting and
Correct.
you have glare and then you've got something
Mhm.
coming across. At University of Michigan, where I went to graduate school, they had like a course and we would like drive
Mhm.
around the edge, you'd see it, and I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool to like, test out the scenarios of it. So it makes a lot of sense. I could see, yeah, if you could build enough situational simulations and then do synthetic data.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, correct. Because imagine like you'll say like with enough like data is bound to happen, right? But like imagine that the child, I don't know, is always like a boy with a backpack. Like how would it react if it was like, like a girl that is, on a bicycle? Like for instance, do you know what I mean? Like you can test infinite scenarios in a simulation world as long as it's close enough to the real world, because then what matters is like the policy that you tell the model. It's like, okay, no, what you have to do here, regardless of what it is, if it comes an object and you identify it as an object that is not supposed to be on the road, then you need to stop, or you need to try to like steer from it. And so for that type of like edge cases, I think that's how we get to more. But I don't like to drive. So I've been bullish on self-driving cars for the longest time, because I just feel like, is a waste of time in a way, in my opinion, when I can work while I'm in a car.
I could see that being from Europe and everything. Being in America, my dad was a traveling salesman, so I would spend like 12, 14-hour days in a car.
I
So
couldn't do
part of
that.
me understands it because I hate the fact of like, oh, it was just awful being in the car for, so long and everything.
Yeah.
But then there's also part of me like I grew up with like classic muscle cars and like I like the feel of like the road and like shifting
I
and
can appreciate that. I can appreciate that, to be fair.
I can see it being a hobby, right? I mean, you get a
Yeah.
car, you drive for fun, and then you're done for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I guess what was like this process growing up? Like you grew up, what is your journey a little bit in Europe?
So I grew up I was born in Switzerland. So my parents were immigrants there. So my dad was like a builder there. My mom would work for a factory. I lived there until I was 8. And then they moved back to Portugal, where like most of my family is. And I grew up in this like small town, like in Fatima, between Lisbon and Porto. And then I studied in Lisbon. And that's when then I did the Erasmus in TU Delft and then Imperial. And then I moved to the US because of OpenBB.
Okay. And have you predominantly lived in the New York City area or have you like moved around the US or
I moved to the Bay Area, to San Mateo, because I felt like, I moved here to the US because of the startup. And so I felt the right thing to do is move to like Silicon Valley. And I really liked it. Technology wise, is amazing. But I felt like most of the prospects that we were talking were based in New York. And so I was like, and then also is closer to home. So like for my wife, like, she spends, time talking with her family, and like the time zone was just a bit harder and also more time to visit. And so, yeah, we've been now living in New York for 2 years.
I lived there for a year and then we wanted to have kids and the whole expense thing came in. I was like, New York's too expensive. But part of me always there's like New York is like nowhere else. Like everyone says that, but it's like when you live there, it has just like the vibe. Like it always has like this feeling of like everyone's doing something.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's the main reason why I don't really think about going back to Europe, because I feel like I identify much more with US in that sense. And maybe it's just because I've been in, I say US, but maybe it's just like the Bay and New York. It feels that way. I feel like everything happens here. And in Europe, like I didn't feel that at all. And then as well, I feel here like everyone is grinding towards something, and so like in Europe is more like laid back, which isn't a bad thing, but just I didn't feel like I identify with that as much, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Would you have ever thought about going back as a retirement process, as you're slowing things down towards the end?
I don't know. I can't imagine like slowing down, to be honest with you. Like I just have fun doing like, like tinkering and trying like new things and stuff like that. And so like I never get to a point that I'm like, I don't know, like on a Saturday, on Sunday, and I think like, oh, I have nothing to do. Like if anything, like I have like this notebook with like future ideas. And so like if I get an open space to go to try something here, I was like, oh man, I love it. But it's like just there's so much things to do, and it's like so much to experiment. And it's like, people talk about OpenClaw, and now I want to do something with OpenClaw, and I have like this idea, and it's like, okay, I need to find time to squeeze in. And it's like the other thing as well is like now with AI, like I can actually test these ideas much more than before, because I can do it like in parallel in a way. But it can never be the scope of a project that is too big that will be a distraction, if that makes sense. It needs to be like short enough that like I gain some insight from it, or I learn the technology so that I understand, okay, are there like good ideas that I can bring to the workspace for OpenBB? Just because I'm optimizing for like the company, success.
Yeah. How do you keep up with all this? I mean, AI has been one of these things like I have had great interest in,
Hmm.
but I'm like on my priority list, I'm like, yeah, I talk about it, and yes, I've used it, and I've like talked to a lot of other people using it, but I always feel like I want more time to like
Hmm.
spend to really like, build things out with it. Like how do you keep up with all that, the new advancements with that?
Yeah, so X is where I spend like most of my time. Like I don't really use Instagram or others, and X is definitely where I get the latest like updates. And then like I think I'm quite of a creative person, and so whenever I see like some technology, I don't usually try it for the sake of trying. So you know how some people like they'll see a new model coming out and they'll just spend like 2 hours testing it and doing like vibe checks and then sharing. I don't really do that because that doesn't excite me. I try to combine that with something else. And so I mean, recently, for instance, like I got into like Pokemon TCG cards from when I was like younger, and I was in a shop like buying some like vintage cards, and the person on the shop was like seeing all the cards that I wanted to buy, and there were quite a few. And they were like, oh, we need to check the prices online. And so they were like, okay, let's just do like rough estimates because the software, they would have to take pictures, then upload, then correct, right? And so I was like, oh, this would be so cool as an application. So I got home and I wrote the specs of what the application is that as an ML pipeline to basically recognize and then does the embeddings of all the cards in advance. And I was like, I put that on my list of things to do. And then I was thinking, then that same night, I was like, wait, this is silly. I can put these onto Claude and then give it access to the browser or give it access first to an image that I took of a card in a weird angle and say like, okay, this card is this one. So like iterate on the pipeline and fine tune the weights of the model to detect the card corners and then find the resemblance of to this card. And it just did it. Like it just worked like a few hours. It wasn't perfect. Then I had to give like other examples so it would generalize well. But it's pretty good, and now I actually use it, for myself. And it was just something that I took from okay, I have this like now like side hobby that I'm interested in, and then I saw like this person with that a challenge. I was like, it would be cool if, and then like that's kind of where I find fun is like doing something that kind of combines like things that are at the intersection of my interests.
Okay, that's great advice. I'm gonna try that a little more. I'm gonna see if I can find some interesting use cases for it and apply it. Because I'm like you, I'm like I don't want to create like some like benchmark and make this project and be like, oh, the new model's X. Like it just bores me. But then when I hear like, oh, this is like a Pokemon application, it's like, okay, like this might be something worthwhile to look into.
Yeah, and like you talk with many people, so I feel like you could have so many ideas from like talking with, because I do get a lot of idea. Like another one I did, and that one I actually shared was I created a skill for an agent to recreate like a report, and these all started because I was at the Carbon Arc offices and I was talking with their CEO, and we were talking about their high quality reports that they put together, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that you could have your team building a skill that knows how to design the reports and knows the tone, and you already have MCPs for the data, so then the agent could also know. And he said like maybe, but he said like these are the best, like the best in the industry. I was like, yeah, but like if you can automate up to 70% of their job, like they can just do more of it. And so I got home, the first thing I done was like I downloaded 3 of their reports. I gave it to an agent and I just said like work from here. So like reverse engineer the report and create a skill so that next time if you were to build these ones, this is the type of report that you'd produce. So he built that skill set, and then I closed the session. I opened a complete new session without the reports that I had put and just the skills. And I said, imagine that you have these mock data, create a report that does the Carbonara style. I put it side by side and I was like, holy cow, this is like, I wouldn't know to distinguish first time. And then I sent a message to the Carbonara team and I was like, what are going to be your next report on? And so I got the agent to use then their MCP for the data, and he created that report. And I was like, you maybe can tell the differences in terms of like some things, but for me as a user, the first instance I see this, I would say that this is Carbonara 100%. And it's incredible that like the technology allows us to do that. But like the fact that I can go home and spin that up in like, a couple like hours of my spare time, for me is amazing, because that, for instance, is what led me to build other skills. And so that knowledge of doing it on the spare time then impacts how I do things at OpenBB, because I can take some learnings from a specific thing onto others in the company.
How do you go about selecting which one to use, like ChatGPT or Claude or Anthropic? I guess
Yeah,
Anthropic.
it's really hard because we said, like we don't want to experiment like all of them and constantly be trying. So I try to be on X like a bit and try to understand what people are utilizing. But then I also have my own experiences, right? And so when Gemini came out and everyone was saying like, okay, Gemini is just as good as Claude. Like what I did is like I saw enough of those that I kind of trusted, and I stopped my Claude subscription, for instance, and I used Gemini. And the thing that then bothered me is like I had the impression that Gemini wasn't up to the standards that I was used to before.
Yeah.
And I can't really describe it because I don't have any benchmarks, but I just knew the quality when I looked at the code. Like I wasn't as happy with Gemini overall. And so I went back to Claude and then like I was actually happy, you know? And so now I think that I have like, okay, Gemini is not as good as Claude like in my brain. And so it's gonna take time for me to trust like Gemini again because I've heard about people. And so I think it's kind of like some of these learnings. And then like I do the same with like Codex, right? I use Codex. The problem with Codex is actually their model is extremely strong, but it's slow. And that really annoys me. So like Claude Code code's more like I do, as in like gets into a problem and then we keep iterating until we get the solution. Codex will spend a ton of time and then like, okay, this is the solution. And it's really good for the planning stage, but I feel for like continuous development, it just takes too long for it to be fun to use, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so now I kind of like have like these kind of impressions of what the models are good, and then I'll speak with people and they'll be like, okay, I've been using this one to do this and he's insane at that, and I'm like, okay, let me try, and if it's good enough at that, like I'll borrow that into my workflow, and then it starts to be something that I actually do.
That makes sense. I've dabbled here and there in a few of them, and I've been debating on getting like a paid subscription and starting to like get more into like the development side to solve
Hmm.
something, come up with some
Yeah.
sort of series or something.
Oh, I would recommend like Claude Code for that. I have the $200 plan, and I didn't want to have the $200 plan. I started with the 20. I was getting reset, and I was like, okay, now I'm losing productivity because I'm not being able to use it more. So I went to the 100, and then I started like getting reset as well. And I was like, okay, because we started incorporating these as overall OpenBB workflows. So for instance, when we do a pull request, we don't just do a pull request. We have a skill that will do like a pull request based on all of the guidelines, and we iterate on that skill once it's done. So basically, for things that we look like okay, like specific patterns, like specific organization, right? Let's say that there's a PR review, and then it says, okay, this is good to go, and then someone on our team like spends a lot of time on actually the code, and they're like, okay, he missed these. We will add that onto the PR review so that next time he won't miss those. And so it's just and that consumes a lot of tokens because it runs for a lot of time. Like it tries to run the server. I also connect it with the browser. And so when it connects with the browser, it can access the underlying like DOM code, but it can also take screenshots via MCP, or I also connect with like Figma MCP. And so it consumes a lot of tokens because of those connections too.
Do you ever worry on the company side of it of the models changing too much?
Um, I do. I like on the development, I don't care because I think I'm not loyal to any company. I'll use whatever the best coding model. So if tomorrow there's like a startup that comes out of stealth and they have the best coding model, I'll just use them, you know? And that's why I think that it's hard to have a moat in this space because we're not really loyal to anything. We're loyal to the best like intelligence. And so I've changed my mind a bit also related with like fine tuning like models and open source because I feel like if you are competing at the intelligence, like you just want the very best. But on OpenBB, the workspace, we have like an integrated copilot where we are using mostly OpenAI, but you can integrate like third parties. But everything that we've built has been on OpenAI, and it's been like pretty good to us, like even a function calling level. But it's also because we've iterated a lot on it over the years. And so in there, I kind of worry in a way, as in like, should we need to be a bit more open? But when we tried in the past to be a bit more open there, the experience wasn't the same. And so there's kind of like this debate between like, allowing supporting any model, but then if someone is using a model that doesn't produce like good results when they are using the workspace, like, is that really like helping benefit us? Because we do have an open framework. So like in theory, you can bring any model to the product. It's just the default experience that we provide. We hook it up with OpenAI today.
Yeah, I always worry about that from a business standpoint of like building out something on top of one of the frameworks, even multiple frameworks, and then having like a new version come out, even of
Yeah.
like the same tool, and then because I mean, they're tech people, like they have like really good success in one area, and then they go, oh, but it doesn't work well on image generation, or it doesn't work well on whatever, and then I feel like they fine tune towards that, but then you somewhat lose the
Others.
I don't
Yeah.
want to say accuracy, but like to your point, like you're talking, like there's like a feel, right? And as a company, like you want your user to have like that that feel and that trust and that branding there.
Yeah. So we actually do not jump on like latest model. Like I say a lot of people do. Like when there's a new model, say, okay, now this is the default on our product. We don't really do that because we need to test a lot of like things first to make sure that we are happy with the overall experience before we do like a change. But yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So to wrap this podcast up here, what is your favorite book that you have read over your whole life? Can be anything from like some people have had like The Little Prince, some people have had textbooks, some people have had all kinds of things. Is there any specific book that you feel like has really kind of changed the way you think, or just a book that you just enjoy coming back to read?
Oof. That's a good one. There's many. I would say maybe the one that I recommended the most over the years
Okay.
is the High Growth Handbook from Elad Gil, one of our investors. I think it's the best book if you're starting like a startup company in general. It just like it talks about every single thing. And yeah, I recommend it like a lot compared to others. But yeah, in general, like I enjoy reading books about like startups, like business, like tech, AI. Yeah.
Awesome. Didier, it was great having you on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.